anti-mosquito spray can cause hallucinations. I didn't believe it until a mosquito told me about it. But the big news is right now, Hurricane Florence is expected to arrive on the eastern seaboard on Friday. The funny thing, it hasn't even made landfall yet. And already, President Trump is taking credit for having the biggest and wettest hurricane of any president in history. CBS is announcing its new policy of less Moonves. His name is the solution. That joke was for Felicia, trust me. The big controversy, of course, is right now the 6 counts of sexual misconduct and all that. But the controversy is Les Moonves' $100 million contract buyout. Nobody likes that. Charlie Sheen complained that when he got fired by CBS, all he got was HIV. Down south, the Mexican Interior Minister said today that he now has the power to legalize all drugs in Mexico if he wants to. That sounds like the cocaine talking. Now, the big deal in Washington right now is that, well, the President Trump, he's having the craziest week of his administration until next week. An editorial in the New York Times written by one of Trump's staffers that ripped him to shreds is making all the news right now, and no one knows who wrote it. The parties are clueless. Republicans can't believe that someone in the White House would betray Trump, while Democrats can't believe that someone in the White House is able to write an editorial. President Trump today marked the 17th year since the 9/11 attacks with a speech about the Twin Towers. I saw that CNN did everything they could to knock him down. Now, no one knows for sure how close Trump was to the Twin Towers that day. But if you look at pictures of him before the attack, he wasn't orange. Meanwhile, Georgia schools are punishing students by reintroducing paddling. And man, kids hate canoeing. Now, the owner of a food truck in Detroit announced that she refuses to serve law enforcement officers. Next week, the owner of a food truck in Detroit tried to report a stolen vehicle. Meanwhile, a container of priceless ancient gold was discovered beneath an ancient Italian theater, proving that snacks have always been overpriced. And finally, now this is the news I've been waiting to lay on you folks. Just this afternoon it broke. Paul McCartney, today, in an interview with Esquire magazine, revealed that back in his Beatles days, he and John Lennon used to masturbate in the dark with their friends at parties while calling out famous people's names. And it's the same old story. Ringo wasn't invited. Turns out after all these years, all you need is lube. Great to have you here, folks. I'm Marcus Hamilton. Welcome to the Comedy Store tonight. We've got some great guests, Steve Byrne and Felicia Michaels. They're wonderful. Can't wait to have fun with them. We'll be right back. Woo! Welcome back to the Comedy Store tonight, and it's a distinct privilege to have my first guest, beautiful, fantastic, funny comedian that I've known a long time. but you wouldn't know it by looking at her. She looks 25 years old still, and she is funny like nothing else. Give it up for Felicia Michaels, ladies and gentlemen. Hi, Felicia.
Hi, Argus.
This is fantastic. I've dreamed of always having you as a guest on my talk show. And
I know. You told me that a couple months ago, and I was like, yes, bring me on.
Let's do it.
You deserve it.
Well, we have quite a comedy community of viewers right now, and I want them to know about you and your career. Tell me about your background and what led you to comedy.
Well, I have been a regular here at the Comedy Store since, I believe, 1985.
Yeah.
I started when I was 21 years old here at the Comedy Store, and how I became a comedian is when I was 18 years old. I was a stripper at a club called the Peppermint Lounge in Colorado Springs, Colorado.
Wow.
And a comedian came in the club, and he asked me out, and that's how I got into comedy.
Wow, really?
Did you not know that?
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's true. It's very true.
Did you meet Trump?
No, I did not meet Trump. No, I did not. Yeah.
Oh, darn.
Yeah.
Well, did you start doing stand-up on stage there in Colorado Springs?
Yeah, because I met the comedian, and he took me at the Denver Comedy Works, which had just opened.
Yeah.
And then there was a girl on stage, and she was bombing, and I think at that time I might have been 19, and I was had been drinking. I'm not a big drinker, so I had a couple drinks, and I got kind of crazy, and I was all like, I could do this. This doesn't seem that hard.
Yeah.
And then he was like, oh, comedy's harder than you think. You should try it. It's harder than shaking your tits. And I'm just going to be honest.
Yeah.
And, and then he was like, I bet you don't have the balls to do it. And I was like, I'm going to take that bet. And then 19, he was a little bit older than me, but the bet was if I didn't do comedy, I had to give him like 100 blowjobs or something crazy. So I was very motivated. Now I would see it as a challenge, like, oh, you think you're going to micromanage this motherfucker? But then, my apologies. But then I was like, no, 100 blowjobs, no way.
Yeah.
So that's how I got into comedy.
That's outstanding.
Yeah.
Oh. So, which is harder? Doing stand-up or shaking your tits? I never tried it.
Well, stand-up is definitely harder for sure. Yeah. It's a different thing. And when I became a regular here at the Comedy Store in 1985, being a stripper suited that so perfectly because at a young age, 21, I was able to talk to the guys because in 1985 the fellows were a little bit randy, you know. That's a nice way to put it.
Well, Jay Leno, about that time, was doing an interview in the mid '80s, and he equated doing stand-up, or at least doing your act, as a part of like audience seduction, a lot like sex. In other words, opening up slowly and going faster and faster and faster, the way Jay would describe it.
Right.
But so you would have had some experience with some teasing and then some completion.
Well, maybe I'll let you have that because
it's
your
happy ending
show,
with a great big joke at the end.
But the thing that it served me well is, when you're very young and you're starting to do stand-up, what would you say the average age of a crowd is? I would say 30, 32, maybe 35. At that time, there was probably more older people in the crowd. Now, like here at the store, there's a lot of young people. But at the time, I didn't have any life experience other than talking about sex, which was the only thing I had in common with the audience. You know what I mean? I wasn't worldly then by any means. So I started talking about sex pretty graphically. And at that time, that was kind of a new thing. So
well, I can think one last remark on that subject to get to further more stuff. But I know that dancing like you did made you comfortable on stage, which takes a lot of people a lot of time to do in stand-up.
Well, yeah.
Or did it?
Well, what makes you comfortable on stage when you're dancing is people throwing money at you. You know what I mean? That makes you really comfortable.
So,
and in stand-up, they never throw money
never,
at you. So that was why it was a little bit more uncomfortable.
Well, that's a real good premise for a routine for you, though.
I should say that, yeah. When I did it stand-up the first time, I was booked at a rock and roll club in Colorado Springs called Godfathers, and and I miraculously just had a killer set, and I couldn't buy a laugh for like 3 more years after that, but because that's how it fucking gets you, you know,
exactly.
the first time you kill,
free.
yeah, and then you suck a big dick for 3 years, you know. So, but it was when I did it, I certainly understood immediately. Yeah, this is what I should actively be pursuing.
Now, did you meet Roseanne in Colorado at that time?
Yes, I did. I have known Roseanne since I'm about 19 years old, and when I came out to Los Angeles, I came out about a year or 2 before she did.
Yeah.
And she actually stayed at my house when she auditioned here at the Comedy Store. And I think if memory serves me right, the story was that she came in and did a Monday night, like everybody else, auditioning for Mitzi, who would sit in the back booth. And Mitzi loved her so much that she immediately took her to the main room.
Exactly.
Remember, because Monday nights were killer nights, like how they are now. And she took her to the main room. And I think that night, a guy, Jim McCullough from the Tonight Show, was in the audience. It never happens like that.
Never.
It was like instant. It was an amazing thing to see,
Yeah, but Mitzi saw it immediately, put her in the main room.
Yeah, there was no one like her. Because a lot of the girls at the time tended to be girls that came through comedy through college. You know what I mean? There was Tamayo and, not her necessarily, but like Carrie Snow and Diane Nichols and
very,
all those.
Very articulate, smart people, educated.
More educated, and where someone like Roseanne was just salt of the earth at the time, and just so unusual. Just
no one had done the housewife routine since Phyllis Diller.
Right.
So the baby boomers were fresh to hear it.
Yes, that's very true. By the way, you know what? I got so lucky. There is this documentary called I Am Comic, and Phyllis Diller was on it. And I do a lot of photography, and I got to shoot Phyllis Diller during that documentary.
Wow.
And Rich Scheidner was interviewing her, and during the documentary, he gave her an 8x10 picture of one of her first headshots, and she looked kind of cute and beautiful in it. And she couldn't believe that she looked that way, because she was kind of made to dress up to where she didn't look attractive in order to be accepted.
During her Los Angeles Times obituary, she said her favorite joke was, because she was self-deprecating, and she made herself up to look like haggardly, you know.
Right.
And in the obituary, she said her favorite joke was when Bob Hope gave her, and she said, I'm so ugly that last night a peeping Tom threw up on my windowsill.
She was funny, you guys.
So you met Mitzi. Mitzi made you a regular.
Yeah.
What was your impression of Mitzi?
You know, the best story I have about Mitzi Shore is I was made a regular, like I said, at the age of 21, and all my friends who were my age, a little bit older, that had auditioned immediately were like, "Fuck you!" I don't know if we're allowed to cuss on this.
Sure.
And but within a year, I was working Vegas.
Yeah.
So the first night I worked Vegas, it was like with Charlie Hill, first American Indian on the Tonight Show, Ollie Joe Prater, and I bombed so bad. And 21, I was like, oh my God. And Mitzi was like, wanted to see me in the room. And I was like, oh, and I was freaking out. And I go in the room. And this was Mitzi Shore to a T from my perspective. She said, I'm going to have to send you home. I was like, oh, Mitzi, I'm so sorry. I just tried my best. No, it's not your fault. It's my fault. You weren't ready yet. And you don't have to worry, I'll still give you spots and all that. And she did. But I do remember, because it used to have the limo that would drive us back and forth to the airport.
Oh, yeah.
And as the next morning, as I was driving away in the limo, I turned around and they were taking my name.
Oh!
I know.
This was at the Dunes Hotel in Las Vegas. And the Comedy Store had the Dunes for about 10 years. And Mitzi would send 5 comics a week down there.
It was the best gig.
530-seat showroom. And it was just fantastic. And she would send us down 5 at a time together. And you did go back to Vegas, right?
Oh, yeah. I went back like a year later, and then probably for the next 7 years, worked once every other month. I never had to have another job.
So your career has progressed where you're headlining all over the country right now. And you're doing a lot of Los Angeles.
I am working a lot in Los Angeles. I have teenage boys, so I was on the road pretty consistently till about 2 years ago. Because now eyes have to be on them constantly.
Yeah. How old are they?
They're 17 and 19. I have 1 more year, and then I'm out. And
Did you get much material off of it?
Oh my God, you know, I try to be a good mom, Argus. I really,
you try.
I really try.
We try.
And I've never brought men around at my house.
No.
Because I didn't want my kids to have 27 uncles. So I try to make good decisions. I try to be real when I talk to them. I did a gig recently at a gay club, and they were giving away condoms at that gay club. So I poured in the big bowl of condoms into my purse because I have teenage boys. And I got home and I divvied them up between the two boys. And my little guy was still filling them up with water, putting them over his head, right? But my older guy, he's a pretty handsome fellow, so we have the big talk. And then this is a totally true story, a couple of weeks go by, and we're walking into the CVS drugstore, and my older son says, "Hey, Mom, can you buy me some more condoms?"
Some more?
And I was like, what? I go, were you playing with them? I told you to keep those safe. You got to protect the ladies, right? He's like, no, I used them all. And I'm like, 15 fucking condoms? And I'm totally serious, right? And then I go, with who? And he goes, with these 3 different chicks. And I'm like, what? And then I go, where? And he goes, in my room. And I was like, what the fuck? And I go, this is totally true story. And I go, when? He goes, when you were home. So then I'm like, hey, don't bring chicks home and have sex with them in my house. And then he starts lecturing me. And he's like, I know. He's like, Mom, you're the one that said that sex is natural. Why do you got to be so sus about everything? So I was like, all right, you can bring girls home, but then I'm going to start bringing men home. And if you hear me in my room giggling with spanking going on and someone asking me, who's your daddy, it's not going to be your daddy.
Right out of Father's Knows Best, 1957.
It's 100% true story.
A piece of modern Americana, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, go ahead.
Felicia, fantastic, and we're having you back like as soon as we can.
Oh, thanks, Argus.
I'm telling you, we've got a great show tonight, and you've got us off to a fabulous start.
Oh, thank you.
I love you, Felicia.
I just want to say I'm so happy you're doing this, and I'm so proud of you. Every time I walk in, I'm not even kissing ass. Every time I walk into the main room, and I still see you going at it with fire in your belly, and I think it's fucking awesome, Argus.
Thanks.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
We came through the ranks together. Great to be with you.
Nice to see you,
Always.
Argus. Okay.
Felicia Michaels, ladies and gentlemen. And we'll be right back with fantastic Steve Byrne. So stay tuned. Stick to the Comedy Store tonight. We'll be right back. Well, Felicia was fantastic, and I'm telling you, it's my privilege to bring to the show a guy that I performed with at the Comedy Store La Jolla and just fell in love with his work. He's an absolute genius. You've seen him as the star of TBS series Sullivan and Sons, and he's going to be in a new show this fall in which he plays a talk show host. So he headlines everywhere. We have a ball together in the Comedy Store main room. Give it up for Michigan's pride and joy, Steve Byrne, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you, buddy. Great to see you.
Better than Detroit.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And I would echo Felicia's sentiments. I think, you doing this and just watching you here today, you are in your element. This is your calling. I mean, obviously on stage is amazing, but to get to see you get to do this, I've always been a fan of yours, but to get to see this, it was a lot of fun.
Well, back in the...
thanks for having me.
Back in the mid-'80s, I was slated to guest host for Johnny, but I snorted my way out of it. We made my way back. Everybody said I was like Johnny's son.
Yeah.
But I didn't realize until I saw a documentary on him about 3 years ago how he treated his sons. So,
yeah.
It turned out to be a curse for a while.
Yeah. The PBS documentary, right?
Yeah.
On him? Yeah.
Fantastic.
It's great, but I think that, you had mentioned Bob Hope earlier, I think, with Johnny especially, and then watching you are, a great conduit in keeping the tradition of pure joke telling. And as a stand-up that came up in New York City at the Comedy Cellar at the time when it was Geraldo and Colin Quinn and there's some great comics, but it's a different style, I guess, of writing.
Yeah. They wrote bits.
Yeah, but watching you, I don't know. It just I've always been a fan of just a classic boom, kind of dun dun and then bang, and there's nobody better in my 21 years that I've seen do what you do, other than Johnny.
Well, Protestant Saxons don't have a lot of complaints in life, so so I emulate Johnny, who was like me, a Methodist joke teller.
Yeah, well, I'm Catholic, so when I drive home, you give me the guilt, and I'll never be as good. So thank you for that.
Man, I open for you.
Oh, please. Well, I think if either of us were Jewish, we'd be the chosen one, so we'd be fine. Yeah, we'd be anointed.
Well, yeah, Mitzi used to call me white bread. You're the white bread. Oh, bless her.
Well, that was because all the coke you were doing.
Exactly.
Oh. Here's the money. There's the white. Oh. Thanks for the bread.
Well, anyway.
Giving you flashbacks.
Euphoric recall there for a minute. Well, no one had more fun and survived than I did, and that's a testament to God above, because we've got a lot of great friends now that are no longer here that I partied with every night.
Well, again, I think that's why, like, even when we were at Mitzi's
condo.
No. The wonderful service that they had here.
Oh yeah.
About a month or two ago. I'm so glad that you're here, because you hear so many of these great names, so many of these comics that I had heard of when I started, even on the East Coast. And again, you're one of the veterans of that generation that is still here. Yeah. That's not only holding his own, but I think marching forward and giving us all something to look forward to. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be kissing your ass, but I really mean that. I really truly mean that. And that's why when we were at that memorial service, seeing you up there and then hearing all the names and seeing how loved you were with the old guard, nothing's changed, because you're as loved with the new guard and even the newer kids that are coming up. So,
Well, if I'm helping somebody, then I'm out of this jail called my brain, okay?
Yeah.
So that's the whole idea. If I can be of service to someone, that helps keeps me sober. And I'll be sober 32 years in November. As I said, I like to say that alcohol is not the answer, but it was always my first guess. So tell me about what you're up to.
I just wrapped doing a film that I wrote and directed about my early years in stand-up called The Opening Act. And I've seen so many of the films on stand-up. Obviously Punchline is they did a lot of great things in that. The Big Sick, Sleepwalk with Me. All these films, stand-up has kind of taken a back seat to it. So I thought, why can't stand-up be the focal point? Why can't stand-up be the drive? And I thought, what better way to communicate the story than an MC getting his first kind of break? Yeah. And it doesn't have to be a Tonight Show. It's just his first time on the road in an A room. So the first half of the film is all the romanticism and partying and optimism of what stand-up can be by hanging out with the feature act. Yeah. And then the back half of the film is all the sobriety and isolation and solitude of finally warming up to a road-weary headliner that discerns some advice to him and kind of takes him under his wing. So you get the full spectrum of all three echelons of stand-up in it. And it should be as funny as my description.
Right. The material will take care of all that.
Yeah. So I'm just a little tired. I've given when I started, I promised somebody I would do something for him. So I just got done with my 100th blowjob.
Really? Wow.
I was watching. I'm a fan.
It's called a pocket full of hundreds.
Yes.
Well. Artistically, I want to ask you a question about you guys that developed at the Cellar, because you guys developed after my crew developed at the Comic Strip and Catch a Rising Star. But I wondered, you mentioned Greg Giraldo?
Giraldo, yeah.
Giraldo and maybe Louis C.K. and some of the other guys. Do you all realize you're like grandchildren artistically of Robert Klein?
Oh, yeah. Robert Klein, when I started, he was very, very present at the Gotham Comedy Club.
Yeah.
And
would he get up and do stand-up?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, he did?
Yeah, very much so. And for sure, whenever Seinfeld was there, this was during Seinfeld. They would always be huddled off in a corner together. So I knew that there was an amount of kissing the ring. You got to kiss the ring.
Well, if there are comedians watching, it's a book that I have asked you to take a look at, and it was called The Last Laugh, the 1975 version by Phil Berger. Any of you comedians watching can Amazon this book. But it's the best description of stand-up comedy and how it developed between World War II and 1975. Wow. And Klein was the apotheosis of what Lenny Bruce started. Lenny Bruce started with the 20-minute bit, and Klein got it down to the 3-minute bit. And you guys are, with Jay Leno and all the guys at Jay's Stage Act, started doing these 3-minute mini movies, is what they really were, and really are now. And you New Yorkers had it down to a pat, and it was Klein in the '60s who really made it jump and dance.
I never thought of it that way, but I mean, that's a bit, right? It's a 3-minute bit, and I think that's probably the issue or the problem right now with all these hour specials that are coming out on Netflix, because there's such a short attention span that if somebody goes on, and that's why you're fantastic, because if somebody's watching X comic, right, on Netflix, it's going to take 3 minutes to get to that punchline. But you get a comic like you've already heard probably 10 jokes. And I think that's the difference in, obviously in certain writing styles, but in certain comics. But I think I'm becoming more of a fan as I've gotten older with the style that you...
You're adjusting to millennials is what you're doing.
Yeah. Because look, if someone's watching on Netflix,
you're competing against that smartphone.
Exactly. They're going to click on to the next guy, and if they can't make them off in the next minute, they'll go something else, and then
can you imagine them sitting through Lenny Bruce? You see, back in the 1950s, as he was coming up, you had 3 things to watch at night. You could watch Jack Parr and The Tonight Show, or you could watch ABC or CBS, which had late movies.
Right.
And what Lenny Bruce would do is he would do satires of these Warner Brothers prison movies, or the Errol Flynn movie, or this, that, and the other. But he would do 25-minute satires on stage of these movies.
Oh, man.
With like hundreds of punchlines interspersed with references to McCarthy, Eisenhower, Kennedy, that all sprinkled throughout.
Yeah.
And they were all works of art.
And per a certain film.
Yeah,
he
per
would
film.
Have 25.
Exactly.
Wow,
and he would, while satirizing the films themselves, how they play today, the prison break, the whole thing. But he was a genius at doing that, and they were like Michelangelo works of art.
Yeah.
And what Klein did was he got those down to 3 minutes, and then all the New York comics inherited that tradition.
Did that. Wow. Well, I think the one thing that I do appreciate about my time in New York was the fact that there are 13 or 14 clubs at the time.
Yeah.
So you really, I for a while held the record of doing 13 sets in one night.
Really?
I started at 6 p.m. I went till 2:15 at the Comedy Store was my last one. And then I found out there was another show at 3 at Times Square, and I could have gotten 14, but I was so pissed at the time. But I think that's the great thing about in New York, you could just keep churning out, and by the end of the evening have some semblance of a good bit. Or in my case, not.
Well, just to satisfy my curiosity, you would have to be on good terms with 13 or 14 club owners, be able to drop in at any time, and they would put you right up?
Well, you would schedule out your whole night. And so I would always, then, because you had your night scheduled, I'd have to call, I'd have every comic's name in my phone, and I would call them up, can I switch this? And I had it all, I'd be able to switch spots with people so I could make all my spots work out.
Would you call all the clubs like we do here, like on Tuesday, and give your availability?
For sure, yeah.
And then they would call you back and let you know what nights were available, and you would pick the spot?
Yeah. I mean, you just tell them available Monday through Sunday, because at the time, I had nothing else going on.
So when did you first develop you knew you had a killer 20?
Probably when I left. After 7 years, I felt like I had a great 20, because when I moved to Los Angeles after that, I was starting to headline on the road.
Yeah.
And I had a great 20 and a good 10 minutes of crowd work.
Yeah.
And I was like, all right, that's enough to get me by.
Yeah.
To headline.
I've seen you work the crowd at La Jolla just for fun, and you're fantastic at it. I mean, really.
Well, thank you. Well, I always took one set in my sets in New York City. I'd always dedicate one set just to crowd work. No material. Just
it showed it in La Jolla.
Well, thank you.
Because you would do the second show, there would be plenty of time, and you would do that with the crowd for about 10 minutes, and they would feel very close to you. and then you could just surf on your material after
Well,
that.
it's because you kill so hard. Then I gotta. I realize I can't just do my material because there is I mean, there's a pendulum swing between them understanding, hearing how the material is being discerned to them, right? And you go on with a pattern and very intelligent jokes, and sometimes they're almost like time lapse, where you pull the pin on the grenade, you chuck it, and that's the punchline, and it takes them a second or two to get it, which is great too. So for me, especially when I was younger and we were starting to work together, I was very physical and animated to make up for a lack of material.
Sure. But like Felicia Michaels will tell you. Felicia.
Never heard of her.
She'll tell you, and Steve will tell you, the Comedy Store La Jolla is without a doubt the best place in the world.
Yeah.
Because the acoustics in that room were unbelievable. Back in 1977, I was a kid. Right, we'd been in La Jolla.
In your 40s, right?
We'd been, yes. Yeah. We had been. I was a young comedian with 1 year of experience, and Mitzi Shore brought me to this disco in La Jolla because we were getting kicked out of Pacific Beach after a year. She wanted to bump up the cover charge on Sunday night holidays,
right?
Because it was going to be packed. And they said, no, that would affect our drinks. Get out of here. She said, okay. So we went to this disco in La Jolla, and we were talking to each other across the room, and we could hear each other clear as a bell.
Wow.
And she said, this would be perfect acoustics for comedy. And so the 230-seat La Jolla Comedy Store.
And that's what it was.
That's where it was.
Oh my God!
It
really?
even has the disco stained glass windows.
Yeah,
ceilings.
on the ceiling.
That's from the disco.
About that. That's crazy. Yeah.
And you absolutely tear them up.
Well, thank you. Well, look, it's a classic comedy room because it's low ceiling.
Yeah.
It traps in the laughter, and so many of these corporate comedy clubs that are out on the road and shopping destinations have lost the charm and the aesthetic, I think, I really think it's the charm of an old school comedy club. There's very few left.
Well, for the comedians that are watching, what are the great, if you can name 3 great comedy rooms across the country, what would they be?
The Cellar, for sure. Low, it's a fire trap.
Yeah.
It's in the basement. Every time you're there, it's like, oh, this is. We're all gonna die if something happens. It's fucking awful. So you better.
Second show
this.
Friday, or you're 90.
Hopefully, yeah. But the Cellar for sure, and then I would say La Jolla, absolutely for sure. Yeah. And then
Felicia mentioned the Comedy Works in Denver. I always heard that was a good.
Again, trap ceiling, right?
In the basement, but I like the belly room.
The belly room here at the Comedy Store, Felicia.
I like the belly room too. The belly room, though, look, any room in this club can be a drag out fight, right? Yeah. I mean, it's slowly not that way. I mean, when I first started here, and you guys know, right? I mean, it was definitely, there were nights where it's like, oh my God, I should quit comedy. Yeah. And the belly room for me is always one of those rooms where it's like, it's either going to go really great or I'm going to eat a royal plate of dicks. Always. There's no middle. I never do okay. It's just awesome, or I just quit. Why do I leave my house?
Strawberry shortcake or cucumbers? What's it going to be? Listen, Steve Byrne is a comedian genius. So I want you to come to the Comedy Store or see him at your next opportunity. Because I love this guy, and not because he's the best crowd I ever had. We'll be back after this. Steve Byrne, ladies and gentlemen, let him hear it.